close your eyes and imagine the sky over the English Channel in 1940, where the Battle of Britain is raging with an intensity that will determine whether Germany can invade England or whether the RAF will successfully defend British airspace and force Hitler to abandon Operation Sea Lion, where young pilots on both sides are flying multiple sorties daily and dying in numbers that would have seemed unimaginable before the war demonstrated what modern aerial combat actually costs in lives and aircraft, and the accumulated trauma of watching friends burn or fall or simply disappear into the Channel's cold water. This is where reputations are made, where aces are born, where the Luftwaffe's most skilled pilots accumulate kills that earn them recognition and medals and the propaganda value that the Nazi regime extracts from their success. Your name is Werner Molders. You are 27 years old, a major in the Luftwaffe, and you are already legendary. The first pilot in history to surpass the Red Baron's World War I record of 80 kills. The innovator who developed the Finger Four formation that revolutionized fighter tactics. The devout Catholic who refuses to join the Nazi Party despite pressure from the regime that wants its heroes to demonstrate ideological commitment alongside military excellence. You fly a Messerschmitt Bf 109, lead Jagdgeschwader 51, have shot down 55 enemy aircraft by September 1940, and you are Hitler's favorite ace, despite your religious faith and your refusal to embrace Nazi socialist ideology, despite the fact that you represent everything the Führer admires: military prowess, tactical genius, Aryan appearance, while privately rejecting the political framework that claims to embody those values. September 5th, 1940. You are leading a fighter sweep over Kent, protecting bomber formations attacking RAF airfields when you encounter a formation of Hurricane fighters climbing to intercept. The engagement develops with the familiar chaos of aerial combat, aircraft scattering in all directions, tracers filling the sky, the constant scanning and maneuvering, and split-second decisions that determine who lives and who dies in encounters lasting perhaps 30 seconds from first contact to final separation. You position behind a Hurricane, fire a 3-second burst, watch the engine and cockpit, watch the British fighter enter a spin that looks unrecoverable, that suggests the pilot is dead or unconscious or has lost control through catastrophic damage. But then you see the canopy jettison, see the pilot bail out, see the parachute deploy at perhaps 8,000 feet, descending slowly toward the English countryside below. Standard procedure is to continue fighting, to engage the next target, to maximize kills while ammunition and fuel permit. Some German pilots strafe parachuting enemy aviators, treating them as legitimate targets who will return to combat if allowed to survive, applying the brutal logic that killing pilots is more effective than merely destroying aircraft, because aircraft can be replaced quickly while training new pilots takes months. But you do not strafe. You never strafe parachuting pilots. This is not mercy exactly. It is adherence to code that predates the Nazi regime, that reflects the chivalric traditions of aerial combat, where pilots respect each other as fellow warriors, even while trying to kill each other, where certain lines are not crossed, even in total war. You circle the descending parachute once, confirming the pilot appears uninjured, then return to the engagement, to the ongoing combat that will claim several more aircraft before the formations separate and survivors return to their bases to refuel and rearm for the next sortie. The mission is recorded as successful. Bombers reached their targets. Escort fighters claimed 7 RAF aircraft destroyed for the loss of 3 German fighters. The arithmetic of attrition that favors the Luftwaffe slightly, though not enough margin to achieve the air superiority required for invasion. 3 days later, September 8, 1940, you are shot down, not dramatically, not in turning dogfight or heroic last stand, but through simple mechanical failure that has nothing to do with combat. Your engine quits over the channel, seizes completely, forces you to glide toward the English coast, knowing that reaching land is unlikely, that ditching in the channel means exposure and hypothermia, and the strong probability of death before rescue arrives. You escape the sinking aircraft, inflate your life vest, begin swimming toward shore through waves that are larger than they appeared from altitude, through water that is shockingly cold even in September, through conditions that sap strength rapidly and create the disorientation that kills more ditched pilots than the crashes themselves. You make progress toward shore, exhausting yourself with each stroke, knowing that reaching land is your only chance because staying in the water means hypothermia will kill you within an hour, will shut down your core functions and leave you floating face down in the surf, where you will drown without witnesses or ceremony or any acknowledgement except the routine notation in Luftwaffe casualty reports. Then you hear the engine, an aircraft flying low over the water, searching, circling your position. For a moment you hope it is German, hope that search and rescue has found you with the speed that would be necessary to save you. But the engine sound is wrong, the distinctive note of a British Merlin rather than the German Daimler-Benz, and you understand that you have been spotted by RAF patrol that is either going to strafe you in the water or report your position to British forces who will capture you if they arrive before you drown.
The aircraft is a hurricane. You recognize it through salt-stung eyes as it makes a low pass overhead. The pilot clearly visible in the cockpit, close enough that you can see his face, can almost imagine making eye contact across the distance that separates hunter from prey, victor from defeated. The hurricane circles again, lower this time, and you brace for the machine gun fire that will turn the water around you into a killing zone, that will end your war and your life in the most ignominious way possible, shot while helpless in the water by an enemy who has every tactical reason to eliminate you. But the guns do not fire. Instead, the hurricane waggles its wings, the signal for "follow me, for I am helping you," and begins flying slowly toward the shoreline, clearly marking a path through the surf, showing you the safest route to land. The British pilot is guiding you to safety, is choosing to help rather than kill, is extending the same courtesy you extended to him 3 days ago when you circled his parachute without firing. Because it is the same pilot, Flight Lieutenant Douglas Bader, the legless RAF ace you shot down on September 5th, who bailed out and landed safely and returned to duty within 24 hours, who is now repaying the mercy you showed him by saving your life in turn. You reach the beach with the hurricane still circling overhead, watching to ensure you make it to shore, that the surf does not drag you back out or dash you against rocks that could render you unconscious and leave you to drown despite having survived the swim. You collapse on the sand, too exhausted to move, too cold to do anything except lie there breathing heavily, while your body shivers uncontrollably and your mind processes the impossible reality that you have just been saved by an enemy pilot, that the man circling above in his hurricane is the same man you shot down 3 days ago, that he recognized you somehow, despite the distance and the water and the chaos of the moment. The hurricane makes one final pass, low and slow, and you see Bader clearly in the cockpit, see him raise his hand in what might be salute or wave or simple acknowledgement. And then he climbs away, returning to his patrol or his base, leaving you alive on English soil, where you will be captured within minutes by the Home Guard units that patrol the coastline, watching for exactly this scenario. Downed German pilots washing ashore, enemy aircrew who represent intelligence value or propaganda opportunity, or at minimum, one less experienced aviator that the Luftwaffe can deploy against Britain.
The British soldiers arrive quickly, rifles raised, treating you with the cautious aggression appropriate for enemy combatant who might be armed or dangerous, despite appearing half-drowned and hypothermic. You raise your hands in surrender, too exhausted to resist, even if resistance were tactically viable, too grateful to be alive to care much about the indignity of capture. They strip you of your flight gear, search you for weapons and documents, wrap you in blankets, and transport you to local military installation, where you will be interrogated and processed, and eventually transferred to prisoner of war camp, where you will spend the remainder of the war, unless exchanged or liberated, or you attempt escape. The interrogation is professional, conducted by RAF intelligence officers who recognize immediately that you are not ordinary prisoner, but Werner Molders, the Luftwaffe's leading ace, the tactical innovator whose formations and techniques have been studied and copied by Allied air forces, the pilot whose capture represents significant intelligence opportunity. They ask about German fighter tactics, about the Luftwaffe's strength and capabilities, about the Bf-109's performance characteristics and armament, and the technical details that might provide advantage in future engagements. You provide name, rank, and serial number as required by Geneva Convention, refuse to answer substantive questions about military matters, maintain the professional courtesy that characterizes interactions between captured pilots and their captors when both sides understand that circumstances could easily be reversed, that today's interrogator might be tomorrow's prisoner. But one interrogator asks a different question. The Hurricane pilot who guided you to shore, do you know who that was? You shake your head, genuinely curious now, wondering how the British know about the incident, how they connected your rescue to specific pilot rather than treating it as random act of mercy. The interrogator smiles slightly. Flight Lieutenant Douglas Bader, the legless pilot. He reported that he observed German pilot in the water, recognized the aircraft type and the timeline, concluded it was likely the same pilot who shot him down on September 5th, but chose not to fire on him while parachuting. Bader said he owed you his life, so he returned the favor. Quite extraordinary, really. Not many examples of that sort of reciprocity in modern warfare. The revelation is startling, not because Bader saved you. You already understood that the rescue was deliberate choice rather than random mercy, but because he reported it officially, acknowledged the debt publicly,
created a record that will become part of both your wartime histories, that transforms private act of honor between pilots into documented instance of humanity surviving despite the systematic dehumanization that warfare requires. You wonder if Bader faced criticism for this, if his superiors questioned the decision to save an enemy ace rather than eliminate him, if the reciprocal mercy will be viewed as admirable or as a failure to prosecute the war with maximum ruthlessness. The weeks in captivity pass with the strange combination of boredom and uncertainty that characterizes prisoner of war experience. You are held at a POW camp for Luftwaffe officers, housed with other German pilots who have been shot down and captured, who spend their days planning escape attempts and discussing the war's progress and wondering when they will be repatriated or whether they will spend years in captivity if the war continues longer than anyone expects. The conditions are acceptable by Geneva Convention standards: adequate food, basic medical care, the treatment appropriate for military prisoners rather than the brutality that characterizes camps holding civilian internees or political prisoners. But in November 1940, something unprecedented happens. You are informed that the German government has negotiated your exchange, that you will be repatriated to Germany in a swap for captured British airmen, that the Reich considers your propaganda value and military expertise too important to leave in British custody when an exchange can be arranged. The news is simultaneously relieving and troubling. Relieving because returning to Germany means resuming your career, means flying again rather than spending indefinite period in captivity. But troubling because you understand the exchange was arranged at highest levels, that Hitler himself likely approved it, that you are being used as a propaganda asset whether you want that role or not. Before the exchange occurs, you request meeting with Douglas Bader. The request is unusual, creates diplomatic complications because enemy combatants are not typically granted social visits during wartime, because facilitating communication between captured German ace and active British pilot raises security concerns and questions about what might be discussed. But the request is granted, perhaps because the reciprocal mercy story has captured the imagination of British public and press, perhaps because both air forces recognize value in acknowledging the chivalric traditions that occasionally survive even in total war. The meeting occurs at an RAF station where Bader is based, in the commander's office, with British officers present to monitor the conversation, to ensure no intelligence is exchanged or security compromised. Bader enters the room walking with the pronounced gait that his artificial legs require, and you stand to greet him formally, extending your hand in the gesture that transcends enmity, that acknowledges a debt that can never fully be repaid because the currency involved is life itself. Major Molders, Bader says, his English accented but comprehensible, his handshake firm despite the awkwardness of balancing on prosthetics. I am glad to see you survived your swim. The channel is unforgiving, especially in September. You nod, searching for words adequate to express gratitude for life-saving intervention, for choice Bader made that contradicted military logic and personal interest, that demonstrated the code that both of you apparently share, despite serving opposing nations. You saved my life, you say, simply, speaking German that Bader understands from his own interrogation training. After I shot you down, you would have been justified in letting me drown or shooting me in the water. Instead, you guided me to shore. Why?
Bader considers the question carefully, his expression suggesting he has thought about this himself, has examined his motivations and tried to articulate something that felt instinctive in the moment, but which requires more complex explanation in retrospect. Because you did not shoot me while I was parachuting, he says finally. I was helpless, descending over enemy-occupied France, where I would certainly be captured if I survived the landing. You could have killed me easily, could have eliminated an enemy pilot who would return to combat and potentially kill German pilots in future engagements. But you circled my parachute without firing, and I understood that as a statement about who you are, about the code you follow even in war. When I saw you in the water 3 days later, I recognized the opportunity to honor that code myself, to demonstrate that it exists on both sides, that we are not entirely consumed by the machinery of killing, despite what our nations demand of us. The explanation resonates with your own understanding of aerial combat ethics, with the traditions that predate this war, and which some pilots maintain despite the regime's efforts to eliminate such sentimentality, despite the tactical argument that mercy toward enemies is weakness that prolongs conflict and costs friendly lives. You have faced criticism from SS officers and party officials who view your refusal to strafe parachuting pilots as insufficiently ruthless, as evidence that your Catholic faith compromises your commitment to total war, as failure to maximize German advantages when opportunities arise. The Luftwaffe does not officially condone what you did, you tell Botter honestly, acknowledging the institutional pressure both of you face when choosing mercy over military efficiency. There are pilots in my squadron who strafe parachuting enemies, who argue that killing pilots is more valuable than destroying aircraft, that allowing enemy aviators to survive means facing them again in future combat. I do not forbid this practice because I lack authority to impose personal code on others, but I do not participate in it myself because I believe some boundaries must be maintained even in total war, that we remain human only by choosing to act humanly even when circumstances make inhumanity tactically advantageous. Botter nods, understanding perhaps that you are describing the same struggle he faces, the same tension between military necessity and personal ethics, the same question about whether codes of honor can survive industrial warfare, or whether modern combat scale and intensity make such codes obsolete sentimentality. I have faced similar criticism, he admits. There are RAF pilots who believe I should have shot you in the water, that saving enemy ace was a betrayal of my duty, that personal honor matters less than eliminating threats to British security. But I could not do it. Having experienced your mercy myself, having understood that you chose not to kill me when you easily could have, I could not then kill you when our positions were reversed. The reciprocity felt necessary, not strategically necessary, but morally necessary. The conversation continues for an hour, ranging across topics that have nothing to do with the war: families, faith, the question of what you will do after the fighting ends if you survive, the mutual recognition that pilots on both sides are more similar to each other than the civilians they are fighting to protect, that the shared experience of aerial combat creates understanding that transcends national allegiance. You tell Botter about your wife and children, about the Catholic faith that shapes your worldview and creates friction with regime that views religion as competitor to state ideology. He tells you about losing his legs in 1931 aerobatic accident, about fighting his way back into cockpit through determination that the RAF initially resisted but eventually accommodated, about proving that disability does not necessarily disqualify someone from service when that person refuses to accept limitation as a permanent condition. The exchange occurs in December 1940.
You and several other German pilots traded for British aircrew held in German POW camps. The swap negotiated at diplomatic levels and conducted through neutral Switzerland to avoid direct contact between enemy governments. You return to Germany as a hero, are awarded the Knight's Cross with oak leaves by Hitler personally, are promoted and given command of fighter units on the Eastern Front, where the invasion of the Soviet Union will soon create an entirely new theater of aerial combat, where the casualties and the scale and the ideological nature of the conflict will make the Battle of Britain seem almost gentlemanly by comparison.
But you carry the memory of Bader's rescue, of the debt acknowledged and repaid, of the code honored by both pilots despite serving nations locked in existential conflict. The memory shapes your subsequent actions in ways that are subtle but significant. You continue refusing to strafe parachuting pilots, continue advocating for treatment of captured Soviet aviators that exceeds minimum Geneva Convention requirements. Continue using your status as Hitler's favorite ace to protect subordinates from SS interference and party ideology. Continue maintaining the distinction between professional soldier and ideological warrior, even as the regime's demands become more extreme and the pressure to demonstrate loyalty through brutality intensifies. June 1941. The invasion of Soviet Union begins, and you are commanding Jagdgeschwader 51 on the Central Front, flying combat missions over territory that stretches thousands of miles, facing Soviet pilots who are poorly trained initially, but who learn quickly and who have numerical advantage that compensates for tactical deficiencies. The combat is brutal, sustained, different in character from the Battle of Britain, where pauses between missions allowed rest and recovery. Here, you fly multiple sorties daily, engage in ground attack missions that expose you to anti-aircraft fire, participate in the grinding attrition that characterizes the Eastern Front, where both sides accept casualties that would be considered catastrophic in Western theater. July 1941. You shoot down your 100th aircraft, becoming the first pilot in history to reach this milestone, an achievement that generates enormous propaganda value for the Reich and which Hitler exploits extensively, presenting you as evidence of German superiority and Luftwaffe excellence. But you are increasingly uncomfortable with the propaganda role, increasingly aware that the war you are fighting has become something different from the professional military contest you understood it to be, that the invasion of Soviet Union involves atrocities and ideological violence that cannot be reconciled with the code you have tried to maintain. You witness SS Einsatzgruppen operations behind the front lines, see the mass executions of civilians and prisoners, understand that the war in the East is not conventional military conflict, but is race war, designed to eliminate populations the regime considers subhuman. The knowledge is unbearable, conflicts with your Catholic faith and your understanding of military honor, creates a moral crisis that you cannot resolve through the rationalizations that allow other Wehrmacht officers to separate their professional duties from the regime's crimes. You consider resignation, consider refusing further participation, consider the various forms of resistance available to senior officer who has enough status to potentially survive expressing dissent. But before you can act on these considerations, before you can determine whether your conscience will allow continued service or will demand refusal regardless of consequences, you are granted leave to attend your mother's funeral in Germany. November 22, 1941. You board a Heinkel HE-111 transport for the flight from the Eastern Front to Berlin, sitting in the passenger compartment with other officers returning to Germany for various reasons. The weather is poor, visibility limited,
the conditions marginal for flight, but not prohibitively dangerous for experienced crew. The aircraft crashes near Breslau, cause unknown, possibly engine failure or pilot error, or simply bad luck compounded by poor weather. You survive the impact, but are critically injured, trapped in the wreckage with internal injuries that are beyond the capability of field medicine to address. You die before reaching hospital, age 28, having accumulated 115 confirmed kills and the status as Germany's leading ace, having developed tactical innovations that revolutionized fighter combat, having maintained personal code that sometimes conflicted with regime's demands, but which you never entirely abandoned, despite the pressures to conform.
17:6. The funeral is a state occasion, attended by Hitler and Goering and the entire Nazi leadership, who recognize your propaganda value even in death, who use the ceremony to celebrate German military excellence and Aryan superiority, and all the ideological constructs you privately rejected while serving the regime whose evil you could not effectively resist. Thousands attend. The event is filmed for newsreels. Your image is used to recruit new pilots and inspire German population and demonstrate that the Luftwaffe remains superior despite the mounting evidence that the war is turning against Germany, that the invasion of Soviet Union is not producing the quick victory Hitler promised, that the casualties are unsustainable and the strategic situation is deteriorating. But one mourner is notably absent. Douglas Bader, still flying combat missions over occupied Europe, still leading RAF fighter squadrons, learns of your death through intelligence reports and feels the complicated grief that comes from losing someone who was simultaneously enemy and kindred spirit, adversary and fellow adherent to a code that transcended national allegiance. He writes letter to your widow, expressing condolences and acknowledging the debt he owes you, the mercy you showed that saved his life and which he was fortunate to repay before your death. The letter is intercepted by British censors initially, flagged as inappropriate contact with enemy national, but eventually is allowed to proceed because someone in the intelligence service recognizes that the correspondence represents something worth preserving, that the relationship between you and Bader demonstrates humanity surviving despite the systematic effort to eliminate it from warfare. Your widow receives the letter in early 1942, reads Bader's account of the rescue and the reciprocal mercy and the brief meeting before your exchange, learns details about your final months that you could not include in your own letters home because military censorship prohibited discussion of combat operations or personal reflections that might undermine morale. She keeps the letter throughout the war, through the years of widowhood and the eventual German defeat, and the difficult post-war period when being widow of famous Luftwaffe ace creates complicated social position, when your legacy is claimed by various factions who emphasize different aspects of your service, the regime loyalists who remember you as Hitler's favorite ace, the Catholic Church that emphasizes your faith and your efforts to maintain ethical boundaries, the military historians who study your tactical innovations without dwelling on the ideological context. Bader survives the war, shot down over France in 1941 and spending the remainder of the conflict in German POW camps where he makes multiple escape attempts and generally makes himself such difficult prisoner that the Germans eventually threatened to confiscate his artificial legs to prevent further escape attempts. He is liberated in 1945, returns to England as hero, writes memoir that includes the story of your reciprocal mercy,
ensures that the incident is preserved as evidence that even in total war, individual acts of humanity matter, that codes of honor can survive when pilots choose to maintain them despite institutional pressure and tactical arguments against mercy.
The story becomes legend, is retold in books and films, and the oral tradition of fighter pilots who pass it down through generations, who use it to illustrate something important about professional military ethics and the distinction between fighting enemies and hating them, between prosecuting war efficiently and allowing war to corrupt your humanity entirely. The details sometimes shift in retelling. Some versions have you and Bader meeting multiple times. Some suggest deeper friendship than actually existed. Some romanticize the relationship in ways that obscure the reality that you were enemies who happened to share code, rather than friends who happened to serve opposing nations. But the essential truth survives the embellishments. You chose not to kill Bader when he was helpless in his parachute. He chose to save you when you were drowning in the channel. Both of you risked criticism and potential consequences for these choices. Both of you believed that maintaining honor mattered more than maximizing tactical advantage. The choices did not change the war's outcome, did not prevent the millions of deaths or the Holocaust or the eventual Allied victory, but they demonstrated that even within the machinery of total war, even when serving regimes that demanded absolute obedience and ideological commitment, individual human beings retained moral agency, retained capacity to choose mercy over murder, retained the ability to act according to code that transcended national allegiance. Your tactical innovations survive you, become standard doctrine in air forces worldwide. The Finger 4 formation you developed, where 4 aircraft fly in staggered positions that allow mutual support and all-around visibility, replaces the rigid 3-plane formations that characterized early war tactics, becomes foundation for modern fighter tactics that persist into jet age and beyond. Pilots flying F-15s and F-16s and F-22s in conflicts decades after your death use formations descended directly from your innovations, benefit from tactical wisdom you developed through combat experience and shared through training and doctrine that outlived the regime you served. But it is the mercy that defines your legacy more powerfully than the tactical achievements, the story of reciprocal honor between enemies that resonates across decades and reminds each generation of fighter pilots that they are not merely weapons to be deployed, but human beings who retain moral responsibility for their choices, who must decide individually where to draw lines between following orders and maintaining conscience, between military necessity and human decency. The story asks uncomfortable questions. If you could maintain code while serving Nazi Germany, what excuse do modern warriors have for abandoning ethics in conflicts that lack the ideological extremity of World War II? If mercy was possible in 1940, when Britain and Germany were locked in existential struggle, when should it ever be considered impossible?
Douglas Bader dies in 1982, aged 72, having spent 40 decades advocating for disabled persons and speaking about his wartime experiences and maintaining that the code he shared with you represented something essential about military professionalism, about the distinction between warriors and murderers, about the possibility of fighting fiercely while remaining fundamentally decent. His obituaries mention the incident with you prominently, recognize it as defining moment in his career, acknowledge that saving enemy ace contradicted military logic, but served larger purpose of demonstrating that humanity persists even in circumstances designed to destroy it. Your widow lives until 1993, carrying the complicated legacy of being married to pilot who was simultaneously Catholic resistor of Nazi ideology and decorated Luftwaffe ace whose victories contributed to the regime's military capability, who maintained personal code while serving institutional evil, who tried to navigate impossible contradiction between honor and complicity. She donates your papers to archives, ensures that the full complexity of your story is preserved rather than simplified into propaganda for any faction, insists that future generations understand you as a human being struggling with moral dilemmas rather than as either hero or villain, as someone who made better choices than most while serving worse cause than any.
The question that survives you, that continues to be debated by historians and ethicists and military professionals who study your career, is whether personal honor within institutional evil constitutes meaningful resistance or merely makes the evil more palatable. Whether maintaining codes of conduct while serving a criminal regime represents moral courage or sophisticated form of complicity that allows participation to continue without adequate confrontation with conscience. There are no simple answers, no formulas that resolve the tension between acknowledging your individual decency and condemning the cause you served, between celebrating the mercy you showed and recognizing that mercy alone does not redeem participation in Wehrmacht operations that enabled Nazi conquest and genocide. What remains undeniable is that the choice not to strafe Douglas Bader created a cascade of consequences that neither of you could have predicted in the moment. His survival and return to combat, his recognition of you in the Channel 3 days later, his decision to repay the mercy by guiding you to shore, the subsequent meeting and exchange, and the preservation of the story through both your testimonies, the way that single act of honor multiplied through reciprocity into a relationship that demonstrated something essential about human capacity for decency, even in circumstances designed to eliminate it. The story endures because it offers evidence that people need, proof that moral choice remains possible even in systems designed to eliminate individual judgment, that codes of honor can survive institutional pressure to abandon them, that enemies can recognize shared humanity despite serving causes locked in existential conflict. Modern fighter pilots study your tactics and learn from your innovations, but the more important lesson is the harder one, that being professional warrior requires maintaining ethical boundaries, even when those boundaries seem tactically disadvantageous, that honor is not optional component of military service, but essential element that distinguishes soldiers from murderers,
that the capacity for mercy must survive even in contexts where mercy seems impossible or dangerous or contrary to institutional demands. These lessons matter not as historical curiosities, but as contemporary challenges that every generation of warriors must confront when they face their own choices about when to follow orders and when to refuse, when to show mercy and when military necessity genuinely requires its suspension. Your grave in Bavaria is visited occasionally by fighter pilots from various nations who want to pay respects to an innovator whose tactics they still use, who want to acknowledge the complicated legacy of someone who served the wrong cause while maintaining personal code, who want to reconcile the contradiction you embodied between professional excellence and moral resistance, between being Hitler's favorite ace and being a Catholic who refused party membership and who protected enemies when protecting them violated military logic. The visitors leave flowers and photographs and handwritten notes expressing gratitude for the tactical innovations and respect for the mercy you showed, acknowledging both the service and the resistance, both the victories and the code that shaped how those victories were achieved. The story of you and Douglas Bader is retold in every fighter pilot training program that emphasizes professional ethics alongside tactical proficiency, that teaches young aviators they are not merely weapons to be deployed, but moral agents responsible for their choices, that insists codes of honor matter even when maintaining them creates tactical disadvantage or risks institutional disapproval. The story is imperfect pedagogical tool. It cannot resolve the fundamental tension between serving in military and maintaining moral autonomy, cannot provide a formula for when to obey and when to refuse, cannot eliminate the ambiguity that characterizes every situation where orders conflict with conscience.
The question that survives you, that continues to be debated by historians and ethicists and military professionals who study your career, is whether personal honor within institutional evil constitutes meaningful resistance or merely makes the evil more palatable, whether maintaining codes of conduct while serving a criminal regime represents moral courage or sophisticated form of complicity that allows participation to continue without adequate confrontation with conscience. There are no simple answers, no formulas that resolve the tension between acknowledging your individual decency and condemning the cause you served, between celebrating the mercy you showed and recognizing that mercy alone does not redeem participation in the Wehrmacht's operations that enabled Nazi conquest and genocide. What remains undeniable is that the choice not to strafe Douglas Bader created a cascade of consequences that neither of you could have predicted in the moment. His survival and return to combat, his recognition of you in the Channel 3 days later, his decision to repay the mercy by guiding you to shore, the subsequent meeting and exchange, and the preservation of the story through both your testimonies, the way that single act of honor multiplied through reciprocity into a relationship that demonstrated something essential about human capacity for decency, even in circumstances designed to eliminate it. The story endures because it offers evidence that people need, proof that moral choice remains possible even in systems designed to eliminate individual judgment, that codes of honor can survive institutional pressure to abandon them,
that enemies can recognize shared humanity despite serving causes locked in existential conflict. The story does not resolve the larger questions about your service to Nazi regime, or whether individual acts of mercy balance participation in the Wehrmacht's campaigns, but it demonstrates that even within the machinery of total war, even when serving evil causes, individual human beings retain agency and can choose to act according to principles that transcend national allegiance and ideological commitment. Modern fighter pilots study your tactics and learn from your innovations, but the more important lesson is the harder one, that being a professional warrior requires maintaining ethical boundaries, even when those boundaries seem tactically disadvantageous. That honor is not optional component of military service, but essential element that distinguishes soldiers from murderers. That the capacity for mercy must survive even in contexts where mercy seems impossible or dangerous or contrary to institutional demands. These lessons matter not as historical curiosities, but as contemporary challenges that every generation of warriors must confront when they face their own choices about when to follow orders and when to refuse, when to show mercy, and when military necessity genuinely requires its suspension. Your grave in Bavaria is visited occasionally by fighter pilots from various nations who want to pay respects to an innovator whose tactics they still use, who want to acknowledge the complicated legacy of someone who served a wrong cause while maintaining personal code, who want to reconcile the contradiction you embodied between professional excellence and moral resistance, between being Hitler's favorite ace and being a Catholic who refused party membership and who protected enemies when protecting them violated military logic. The visitors leave flowers and photographs and handwritten notes expressing gratitude for the tactical innovations and respect for the mercy you showed, acknowledging both the service and the resistance, both the victories and the code that shaped how those victories were achieved. The story of you and Douglas Bader is retold in every fighter pilot training program that emphasizes professional ethics alongside tactical proficiency, that teaches young aviators they are not merely weapons to be deployed, but moral agents responsible for their choices, that codes of honor matter even when maintaining them creates tactical disadvantage or risks institutional disapproval. The story is imperfect pedagogical tool. It cannot resolve the fundamental tension between serving in military and maintaining moral autonomy, cannot provide a formula for when to obey and when to refuse, cannot eliminate the ambiguity that characterizes every situation where orders conflict with conscience.
But the story demonstrates that choices matter, that individual decisions create consequences that ripple across decades, that mercy extended can be mercy returned, that recognizing humanity in enemies does not require abandoning the fight, but does require refusing to let the fight destroy your own humanity. These are not abstract principles, but practical wisdom that saves lives and preserves souls and prevents warriors from becoming the monsters their enemies claim they are, that allows soldiers to serve their nations without being entirely consumed by the causes they serve, that creates possibility for reconciliation after conflicts end because combatants remember they fought other humans rather than abstractions deserving only destruction. Your legacy is this complicated truth, that you were Nazi Germany's leading ace and Catholic who resisted ideology,
Hitler's favorite and pilot who refused to abandon honor code, tactical genius who revolutionized aerial combat, and warrior who chose mercy when killing would have been easier. All of these things are true simultaneously. All of them matter. Understanding your story requires holding the contradictions rather than resolving them, acknowledging that humans contain multitudes, that good people serve evil causes, and evil causes are sometimes served by people who retain capacity for good, that history is not simple morality tale, but complex record of choices made under impossible pressure by individuals who were neither heroes nor villains, but both and neither, who navigated moral terrain without adequate maps and made decisions that defined them in ways they could not fully predict or control. The sky where Werner and Bader fought is peaceful now, crossed by commercial aircraft carrying passengers who do not think about the battles fought at altitude, who do not know the names of pilots who died, or the codes they maintained, or the mercy they showed. But the story survives in the institutional memory of air forces worldwide, preserved because it matters, because it teaches something essential about what warriors owe each other and themselves, because it demonstrates that even in total war, humanity persists if individuals choose to maintain it, if pilots remember they are fighting other pilots rather than abstractions, if mercy remains possible when tactical logic suggests it should be abandoned. If this story challenged your understanding of honor and complicity, of whether individual decency can coexist with service to evil causes, engage with it. Leave a comment. Can personal codes of honor redeem service to criminal regimes, or does such service invalidate the codes, regardless of how faithfully they are maintained? Where do we draw lines between recognizing individual moral courage and condemning institutional evil? Can enemies honor each other without betraying their causes? Subscribe to this channel for more stories that resist simple moral categories, that demand we grapple with the reality that history's actors were complex humans making impossible choices, that demonstrate mercy and violence can coexist in single biography without one negating the other. Hit the like button if you believe these nuanced conversations matter, if you think understanding warriors requires acknowledging their contradictions rather than simplifying them into heroes or villains. Share this with someone who needs to know that codes of honor matter even when maintaining them is costly, that enemies can recognize shared humanity, that mercy extended can be mercy returned, that individual choices ripple across decades and define legacies in ways tactical achievements never can. The question Werner Mulders and Douglas Bader faced, whether to choose mercy or military advantage, whether to maintain honor or maximize killing, whether to see enemies as humans or as targets, this question recurs in every conflict, confronts every generation of warriors, demands answers that cannot be found in doctrine or orders, but must come from individual conscience willing to accept consequences. Their answer was mercy. Their legacy is the demonstration that such mercy is possible even in circumstances designed to eliminate it. Remember their choice. Let it inform yours when the moment comes. The sky remembers. History judges. Choose accordingly.